Hi, welcome back to my channel if you've been here before. If you haven't, I'm Gemma, I talk about books, and this is my May wrap-up. Please excuse the messy wet hair. I am going away tomorrow for 3 nights and I haven't even started packing yet. It's currently 1 o'clock in the afternoon and I have done absolutely nothing today. So I've got to try and film this as quickly as possible and edit it and get it uploaded. And I'm a little short on time. So I'm just going to quickly go through the books that I read in May. I can't even remember if they're actually in the order that I read them. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is How the Dead Speak by Val McDermid. As of May 2022, this is the latest book in the Tony Hill Carol Jordan series, and this is a good one. I really liked this one. It's a bit different to the rest of the series, so this is more of a cold case rather than a recent crime that has taken place. Basically, some skeletal remains have been found at the site of an old school run by nuns, and the team need to investigate why they're there, how they ended up there, who's responsible, was there anything suspicious and illegal that took place. While they're investigating that, they find a separate group of bodies that are more recent and definitely appear suspicious. So there's sort of 2 crimes that appear to have taken place, and our characters need to find out what the link is. Are these all murders committed by the same person? And then who is responsible? This is also slightly different because in previous books, Val McDermid has liked to have chapters that are from the perspective of the killer. In this, as far as I remember, there's only 1 chapter that we get where we get that person's perspective and viewpoint of kind of why they're doing what they're doing. As I've said before, the books all carry on from one to another. So subplots, characters, they all follow on. If you haven't read previous books, I think it's very difficult to follow the narrative of how the characters are linked, what's happened to them in previous books, have their backstory and their history. And this is a definite case where you need to have read previous books, because otherwise this one just won't make any sense at all. It's quite difficult to talk about this book without talking about things that have happened in previous ones, so I'm just not going to. But yeah, with this series you definitely need to have read them in order. I would really like to do a video at some point where I talk about the whole series and talk about all the individual books and be a little bit spoilery, but I think it might be a video that takes quite a while to plan and film, so I'm not sure exactly when I'll be able to do that. But yeah, this is a series that I have just loved from start to finish, and I'll be really interested to see if she does do anything else with it. So I also read Cujo by Stephen King, and I know that this is a real hit and miss book for a lot of people. I actually know more people who don't like this book than those who do. I, however, love this book. This is one that I have read 2 or 3 times now, I think. And I just love it every single time. It's quite harrowing, it's quite hard going, it's quite hard hitting. It's probably one of the most emotionally draining books of his, but I absolutely love it. So, just in case you don't know about Cujo, Cujo is a dog. He is a St. Bernard. And he does a silly thing one day of chasing a rabbit. The rabbit goes down a hole. Cujo attempts to follow and pretty much gets his head stuck. And what he doesn't realise is that the hole leads into a cave full of bats. And the bats have rabies, and he gets bitten, which ultimately means Cujo ends up with rabies. And that's not good. It doesn't end well for him or for quite a few people. We are also following Donna, who is married with a son, and there's a subplot of her having had an affair. There's a huge amount of regret. There's a lot of mixed feelings. She basically does decide that she wants to stay with her husband, but it's whether or not he can forgive her. There's also another tiny subplot of her husband Vic, who runs an advertising agency, and basically there's been a bit of an issue with one of the products that they work on, and they're almost going to lose the business. That little subplot it's a little bit boring, but it builds his character. So, there's this guy whose work is struggling, he's stressed, he then finds out that his wife's been cheating on him, he's got a son that he adores, and it just adds to his character while there's loads of other stuff happening to other people. So basically the plot of Cujo is that Donna's car breaks down and she's taken it to try and be fixed, but something has happened to the mechanic. I won't go into details, but there's a rabid dog on the loose, so have a guess. And she ends up trapped in the car with her son. It's the middle of summer, absolutely boiling hot. They're basically starving and dehydrated, with a homicidal animal roaming around trying to break his way into their car and kill them. It's not the most cheerful read, but I don't know what it is about this book, but I absolutely love it. I love the fact that at times we are actually kind of getting a glimpse into how Cujo is feeling. He starts off just being tired and a bit sore and confused, and we go on to him being angry and not understanding why he's angry, and he then reaches a point where he just wants to kill everybody in sight. This overwhelming anger has taken over. He's an incredibly sick dog. Now, if you love dogs, if you're an animal lover, it is quite a hard book to read. The thought of an animal suffering in that way, I think I can understand why some people don't want to read this book, or they've just sort of gotten to a certain point and just decided that they can't read anymore. But I think something that Stephen King does really, really well, particularly in this, is it's that small town atmosphere. It's almost an isolated thriller, because we spend so much time with Donna and her son in the car. You can feel that sort of suffocating atmosphere and the dread and horror of what is going on. And you kind of feel that the ending is a little bit obvious and just this impending doom that you don't really see how they can find a way out. I know that the ending of this book really splits opinions, but I love it. I actually prefer the ending of the book to the film, and I highly recommend watching the film as well. The thing about this is that for a Stephen King book, it's very concise, it's very to the point. He does occasionally go off on these little tangents, but then he's Stephen King, so you wouldn't really expect anything else. But he tells the entire story in less than 350 pages. That's what this edition is anyway. I just think he does a really good job. I really, really love this one. Highly recommend it. So next up we have The Missing Girl by Shirley Jackson. This has 3 very short stories in. I think we've worked out by now that, for me, Shirley Jackson is so unbelievably hit and miss. It's to the point of being annoying, especially her short stories. I veer so much between either really liking them or really disliking them. There's hardly any middle ground for me. She's an author who I'm really, really struggling to actually come to an opinion about. There are, as I say, 3 stories in this. They are The Missing Girl, Journey with a Lady, and Nightmare. And they're all a little strange. Their endings are quite sort of ambiguous. There's not really a point to them. I don't really get what Shirley Jackson was trying to say. I read them. They're super quick reads, but they're not hugely memorable, and I can't really see myself making any effort to read them again, and that's all I can really say about this. So next up we have Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. I have never been more excited to read a book than I was when I picked this up. So this is the start of the series, which introduces the world to Hannibal Lecter, one of the most iconic fictional serial killers that has ever been written about, ever been put on screen, and yet he is only in this book for the minimal amount of pages, almost like Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, when I think he's on screen for like 12 minutes in total or something. It's some really tiny amount, but you never forget him. So in this book we have Will Graham, who is a profiler for the FBI, and he has basically retired. He was on the team who caught Hannibal Lecter and put him in a psychiatric prison. There is now a new killer on the loose, and they have come to Will and said, please can you help us find them. So he's profiling this killer. In the meantime, he goes to visit Hannibal Lecter, and there's kind of this standoff between them. They're these 2 incredibly well-written characters, head to head, and it's really, really interesting, the scenes between them. Hannibal Lecter is absolutely fascinating and intriguing, and I loved every single page that he was on. However, as I say, he is not the real bad guy in this book. He is not the serial killer that they're hunting. They are hunting a man called Francis Dollarhide, and he is going around killing families. I'm not going to talk about his motive, why he's doing it, anything like that, but we get a huge amount of backstory. There's these flashbacks where he remembers aspects of his childhood and growing up, Just one thing that made me slightly uncomfortable while reading this was that typical kind of trope of having the disfigured person as the villain. I know this book was written back in the 70s, and so that was quite a typical attitude. But in this kind of day and age, it's a little uncomfortable to read when he's the bad guy, therefore he must look different. However, this is still a fantastic book. The characters in this are absolutely perfect. There are scenes in this that are so chilling that this is the ultimate thriller. There are definitely horror elements to it, but I wouldn't describe this as a horror novel. I would definitely just describe it as a crime thriller which is exceptionally dark. And I cannot wait to carry on with the series. I'm really, really looking forward to reading Silence of the Lambs. I've never read it. I can't wait. And this is brilliant. So the next book I have is non-fiction, and this is The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. And this is basically 5 biographies in one book detailing the lives of the women who were killed by Jack the Ripper. This is one of the best non-fictions I've read in a really, really long time. And the reason for that is because the author makes absolutely no attempt to discuss Jack the Ripper. This is not another book where we try to figure out who he was. We describe the killings in quite gruesome and dramatic detail. This is a social history book about women, specifically 5 women, but this is a book about women, where they were placed in society, how if you were born into a working class family, or if you found yourself losing money, which happened particularly after women got divorced, if a woman ended up in a workhouse or a doss house, if she ended up homeless, if she had any form of addiction problem, most likely back then to be alcohol, but also if she had any form of mental health issues, pretty much everything was against her. There wasn't the support, there wasn't sympathy and care, and this book details just how women were treated, how they were thought of, how it was assumed that if a woman was living on the streets, or if she didn't have a man to specifically support her and care for her, she was presumed to just be a prostitute. And that's something that I think was really important, because the narrative that has gone on in history since these killings took place has told everybody that the 5 women who were killed were prostitutes, that Jack the Ripper specifically targeted those sort of women. And actually, there's only really evidence that one of the women definitely worked as a prostitute. The others were poor and unsupported and did what they had to do to make money, but not all of that was getting involved in the sex trade. And there was just this lie that was put out by the British newspapers at the time and the police, and those lies carried on throughout history. The thing that is so interesting about this book is that it becomes clear that absolutely nothing has changed since that period of history when it comes to attitudes about women. specifically when a woman is killed and the questions that are asked. So immediately afterwards, the questions are, what was she doing? Where was she going? Why was she out on the street late at night? Why didn't she have somebody with her? Why didn't she have a man with her? Had she been drinking? What was she wearing? All of those questions were asked about these 5 women, and all of those questions still get asked nowadays, and it is simple victim blaming. The fascinating thing about this book actually is just the amount of research that this author has clearly done. We find out about the childhoods of the 5 women. They were not all born into working class families. They were not all born in the same parts of the country. They weren't even all born in the UK. And there is not actually a huge amount of evidence to say whether or not they even met each other. And yet in films and on TV, they seem to have been this group of friends who just got picked off. There's absolutely no evidence for that at all. The stories that are told in this book are sad, and Hallie Rubenhold is incredibly sympathetic in her writing. The entire point of this book is to give a voice to these women. They're never going to get justice. We're never going to find out who Jack the Ripper was. But the fact that he's kind of become this mythological figure over time, where it's just this top hat and a cape in a fog, I think sometimes we kind of forget that actually it was real. He was a real life killer, and the women who he killed were daughters, they were wives, they were mothers, they had families, they had friends. Yes, they had problems, but who doesn't? But none of that means they deserved to be murdered. And I would recommend everybody read this book to learn about these 5 women. And the thing that I think is also really important is that I realised while I was reading this that I couldn't actually remember their names. I have been fascinated by the stories that we have been fed about Jack the Ripper for years, and yet I still couldn't remember the names of the women he killed. And yet we're obsessed with trying to figure out his name, and yet these are the ones that are important. And their names were Polly, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane. And they are the names that we should remember. And then the final book that I read in May was The Maid by Nita Prose. And I've heard so much about this on BookTube and on Instagram, and I finally caved and got a copy, although I will admit that I also listened to this on the audiobook, which is narrated by Lauren Ambrose, and she does a fantastic job. So this book has a very simple plot. Molly is a maid in a hotel, and she goes to one of the rooms one day and discovers a body. One of the hotel guests has died, and she finds him, and it's the investigation into who killed him, how did he die, and whether or not Molly has anything to do with it, because obviously she found the body, so she is immediately prime suspect. So this is a cosy mystery. This is not a thriller. This is not a gory slasher. It could not be more different from Red Dragon. Everything is told from the perspective of Molly, and she is probably one of the most reliable narrators you're ever likely to get, really. I've read a few reviews of this, and I haven't read anything by the author to say whether or not this is her intention. But a lot of people have highlighted that the character of Molly is neurodivergent or neurodiverse. Now, I apologise that I don't know the difference between the two. There might not even be a difference. but please don't have a go at me in the comments if I've got something wrong. However, I really, really hate this obsession that we have with putting people in boxes and sticking labels on them. For me, Molly is the perfect person. She is honest. She doesn't lie. She is hardworking and diligent and loyal. She does a job that most people would refuse to do, probably think is beneath them, and yet she takes pride in it. She absolutely loves what she does. She likes things to be neat and tidy and ordered and have a place. She sees the world very black and white. She doesn't always understand people's expressions or social cues, but she's basically just a really good human being. The problem is everybody else around her. Every other character in this book is a liar, a cheat, a thief, a murderer. And yet we're supposed to look at Molly and think that she's the slightly weird one, that she is the one who isn't quite normal, that she is the one who's different from everybody else. And I just can't help but find that annoying, because I think everybody is different. It's what makes the world tick. If we all saw the world in exactly the same way, if we all spoke to each other in the same way, if we all had the same way of thinking, nobody would ever be different, and the world would be an incredibly dull and boring place. I related a huge amount to Molly. I like that she doesn't always want to socialise with people, that she is quite happy to just do her job, do it well, and be left alone. I liked that she spoke to people in a way that she would like to be spoken to, and that she trusted the people around her, but also that she didn't always understand whether or not people were being honest with her, whether or not they were laughing at her or with her, and that she didn't always have a clear understanding of what was going on around her. And for me, words like neurodivergent are just telling that person that they are weird and abnormal, and that the way they see the world is wrong. And I don't like it, because to me it's just called having a personality and being you. And everybody should just be able to be themselves without being bullied or made to feel different. So I read this book and I didn't see Molly as weird or different or abnormal or anything. I actually saw her as the ideal character, and it was everybody else around her who was mean and vindictive and a criminal in most cases. I thought the mystery aspect of this was a little bit obvious, a little bit predictable, but I really liked the writing. I liked the fact that it was a really quick and easy read. The pacing was great. I thought the characters were all really well written, and I liked the ending. There was one tiny little plot point involving Molly's grandmother, which is revealed towards the end, which I thought was unnecessary. I didn't totally dislike it, but I just thought it wasn't needed for the rest of the story. But overall, I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. I just don't think that I fully had the same opinion of the main character as a lot of other people who have read it. But otherwise, this was a really good way of ending the month. So they were the books that I read in May. Let me know in the comments what you read, what your favourite book was, what you plan on reading in June. I will be back soon. Hope you stay well, and see you later.